Missing in action, Theresa May, Emmanuel Macron, and now US President Donald Trump and his team. Domestic issues have them all sitting out the powerful World Economic Forum. Trump is recalling the team to Davos. He cited the ongoing shutdown that's affecting about 800,000 federal government employees. He says that's the reason for the withdrawal. The shutdown followed Trump's refusal to sign off on funding for a host of departments, and this was in retaliation to the refusal by the Democrats to approve his plans for a US-Mexico border wall. The US economy has been hard hit by this shutdown. So what will the impact of the withdrawal of the world economic powerhouse from the Davos summit? Will the rest of the world and South Africa be affected, possibly by the US's absence there? Tonight we have in the studio Professor John Stremlau with his focus on international affairs. It's lovely to have you with us. It's a disaster, isn't it?
Well, the Trump presidency is problematic right now. In 2019, a lot of things are coming together so that he's preoccupied with his domestic issues and the shutdown, which is linked to this demand for a border wall, or at least 230 miles or 370 kilometers worth of wall. And the Democrats are finding that this is a politically plus issue for them. These tying of putting people out of work for something like a demand on a wall in Mexico border is not really productive politically, and the polls are showing to indicate that. But Trump is also missed in Davos because I had sort of hoped that maybe you get a China trade deal, which would redound well for South Africa and reassure the rest of the international community. That could happen anyway. It seemed to be moving in that direction. But with Trump not there and the government delegation not there, there's not going to be any progress made. There will be the private sector, of course, there.
And what have the ramifications been of this trade war? I mean, obviously, it's impacted so many economies, especially developing economies. How much longer can that go on for?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have a crystal ball. It does seem as though the slowing of the Chinese economy and the U.S. being in a period now where there's a lot of consumer uncertainty and not being very confident about the future, but actually the numbers are pretty good still. We've had this long period of unemployment decline, and that's still continuing, and the economy is continuing to grow. But by the way, this shutdown is hurting the economy, and it's hurting it to 0.25% of growth, which if you're only growing at 2%, it adds up pretty quickly. And if it continues, it really will be dire, I think, for the economy, and that will reverberate around the world because the U.S. is still the biggest economy in the world.
I mean, he cited the impact on the 800,000 odd federal employees. I mean, do you think it's lost on him that actually he's one of the main reasons behind the pain?
Well, he denies that, and of course the Democrats are making this a very big issue. We'll give you a discussion about border security and even put some money into the wall, and the irony is that there was a deal that they had negotiated with the Republican leadership in the Senate before Christmas that was going to go ahead and give some space for negotiations on immigration and border security, and at the same time keep open these 7 departments that have been closed, about 20% of the workforce. But, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, starts collecting taxes supposedly in a couple of weeks. You've got the transport authorities not working, and so their air safety concerns are growing. And there's a lot of problems exemplified by the closing of the Martin Luther King memorials. Today is a public holiday in the United States, so the Delta Airlines in Georgia had to step in and say, we'll pay for opening up the King Homestead, the King Museum, and the King Church. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. All right, so Trump and his team are not there. Who do you think is going to fill the vacuum? And is there space now for South Africa? We know that Cyril Ramaphosa is under a lot of pressure to strike some sort of deal. I mean, he's possibly going to look at the UK because they certainly need friends.
Yeah, well, let's not go to Brexit because they're probably meeting tonight and deciding on the latest plan that Theresa May is putting forward. But on a serious note, Cyril Ramaphosa and most world leaders know perfectly well that the United States is missing in action. It's missing in action from the Asian economic community at the start of his presidency. It's missing in action from the climate change, which is of great concern to South Africa, and certainly at the G20 and at the G7 and in the process of discussing about NATO. Donald Trump has sort of been carrying out Vladimir Putin's greatest wishes, keeping the West from organizing itself and in partnership with the South.
How do you think the U.S. will lose out by not being at Davos? And how much weight does it remove not having Emmanuel Macron, Theresa May and Trump?
Well, let's bear in mind that it is the World Economic Forum, and a forum is a talking shop. And yes, this does lead to confidence building and opening up some deals between private companies, and President Ramaphosa is there with an important delegation from South Africa. Business can go on there, but let's not exaggerate the importance of Davos. What is more concerning is, will the United States pull itself together? Will there be a full investigation of the allegations of state capture in effect? Will there be something comparable to the Zondo Commission with the House investigatory and subpoena powers to get to the bottom of whether or not there has been real corruption or not?
I mean, how close are they to him?
We don't know, because we're all waiting for Robert Mueller, the former head of the FBI, to release his report. It's been very close hold, but there's been enough signals to suggest that he does have a lot of evidence that would implicate Donald Trump in some very questionable dealings economically, as well as politically, as well as collusion with the Russians. But we really don't know until we see the report. Speculation is it could be in the next month. It's going to be a very exciting 2019.
Oh, it certainly is. What sort of leverage does this remove from the U.S.? I mean, he stopped the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This is Trump going to Afghanistan. I mean, that could be another sort of petulant move. But if the U.S. is seen as being pretty weak at the moment, even though it is one of the strongest countries on the planet, does it remove its negotiating power, its political will?
You're raising a very interesting question, because the U.S. was already in sort of eclipse to the rising powers. China is taking over quickly as the most powerful economic actor in the world, and it's not a classic big power relationship in my mind. It's a question of whether or not we can have partnerships to deal with things like climate change. The U.S. should be a responsible international stakeholder. It should be a partner of South Africa and other multilateralists that are trying to cut deals that would be to the benefit of all of us.
But it's not, is it?
It's not.
And he's putting more of his energy and effort into striking deals with North Korea. Obviously, it's great if you can, remove some of the
as South Africans have discovered in their going through this difficult period under President Zuma and trying to get to the bottom of corruption. U.S. has a similar problem right now. It's following along in South Africa's pathway to some extent. And if it can turn itself around, it may be, in fact, a more reliable partner and pick up the kind of identity of being an inclusive democracy that's very diverse, rather than the white ethnic nationalism that Donald Trump has exploited to get himself to the White House, and it really is his basic electoral base. This is not just racist, but people who think about the color of their skin more than they should, because we are in a world where it belongs to all of us.
John, very good to have you with us. John Stremlau, thank you.
My pleasure.